Okay, take it away, Andy.
All right. Just give me a second here. Nope. That's the one I want. Share. Okay. Well, I'm up here. I can't see anybody. So hopefully Abram will watch for people raising their hands or whatnot. So welcome all. Welcome back after a summer. I hope you had a good one. Got out at least a little bit and saw some people before the cases started climbing again. That would have been nice. It is starting to look, based on the latest numbers, that our decision to remain remote at least for the next little while was well founded, and obviously we'll do so until numbers go down again and we can see what's going on. But welcome to the joint JS and Ruby meetup. We'll be back on our monthly schedule once again, so glad to have you here. Our agenda, as per normal, go over the code of conduct, any news. We will do our talks, which is plural in the agenda, but singular tonight. And then afterwards, we get together at the tables and do a little bit of socializing. So I'm just going to move right in to get through this stuff as quickly as possible. So the first thing is that by attending and here with us, you agree to our code of conduct, which is very straightforward. Be kind, be patient, be awesome. Just be nice to everyone and respectful, and that's good. The full code of conduct is on the Dev Edmonton site. I don't have a link up here, but it was in the previous slide. But so if you want to talk with anyone, I'm not sure anyone that's I'm not sure if anyone that's on the meetup tonight is not on the Slack. But we have two channels on the Slack, Meetup Ruby, Meetup JavaScript. It's still Meetup JavaScript. We fixed that, correct, guys? Hopefully. I will do a quick check just to make sure.
It's meetup chat.
Yes. Sorry. We had that wrong. One of the previous slide decks, so I needed to make sure. So come and join those channels if you want to say anything. They're open, and general rules of the site apply. We don't have a link for the Slack, but you can reach out to any of the organizers or anything and get it. I am not sure if this is true for today, but in the past we have recorded these sessions and posted them to YouTube. So be aware of that. If you don't wish to be, then make sure your camera is off and so forth. We can skip the Wi-Fi because you're probably using your home. Anyways, on to the news. On the Ruby side, Rails 7 is coming. Ruby Gems 3.2.27 has been released. RubyMine 2021 2.2.1 is available. And the stable Ruby versions are 3.0.2 and 2.7.4. Nothing really exciting in that list. However, on the JavaScript side, looks like we've got some interesting stuff here, including Electron 14 has been released for a new Chromium and Visual Basic. There's the link there. Angular 13.0.0, which is the next major release, I'm guessing, with the link there. And a couple of links about WebAssembly. The first being 12 examples of an InfoWorld article. And then there is a Stack Overflow article with 12 projects as well. So please go and have a look at those. It looks very interesting, and I'm sure that lots of great stuff will be coming out from that. All of us here in the various meetups, we're all part of Dev Edmonton, so we encourage you to participate. And it's a wonderful group to be involved with. There is some news on the Dev Edmonton front, which I'm not sure has been announced, so I will leave that. I believe that they're looking for some people for some participation, but if Ian has some time after the presentation, I'm sure he could clue you all in about that. However, there is a survey out there, and the link is here. And we're strongly encouraging you to go and have a look, and please fill out the survey if you wouldn't mind. The next Dev Edmonton meeting will be in October 13th. They actually had their last meeting yesterday. So because we were pushed back a week, normally they have their meeting a week after we have our regular meeting, but they had theirs the day before. And that's the meetings are normally on Google Meet. And I believe that everyone is encouraged, anyone is welcome to attend. Although, of course, they do have voting and so forth like that going on at the meeting. So only if you're a member are you eligible to vote and everything. I believe, according to the bylaws, of which Ian or Abram could correct me if I'm wrong there.
No, you're absolutely correct. But we would encourage anyone to come out because everyone's allowed to talk. Discussion is definitely available to everyone, and honestly,
is open and welcome. I was.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So if you're interested at all, you want to know what it's about, go and attend the meeting and see, and you can participate. You don't have to become a member right away. You can wait and see if it is actually for you and then take it from there. So for us, a little bit of business. Our next meetup is scheduled right now for October the 7th, unless something comes up and we have to move. That one is, we're still doing virtual for present. Dev Edmonton and Startup Edmonton had spoken about returning to the place downtown, but we've decided, at least for the present, that won't be what we're doing. And we'll keep you updated on that. And if you have any comments on that, by all means, go into the Slack if you wouldn't mind, and posting to give us your input on your feelings about that. There's a lot of synergies that happen from being in person, and then there's also a lot of virus transmission that occurs as well. So we're just being a little bit cautious. And of course, we're always looking for speakers. As a matter of fact, we don't have a speaker on the Ruby side this month. I am my former, I'll say former, she has decided that to move on. So Kelsey won't be working with me on organizing the Ruby side of things. And so I'm working on my own here. And so if anyone has anything, by all means, get a hold of me. And also on the Ruby side, I mean, I am open if other people want to get more involved with arranging things as well. So contact me about that. But we have some links there if you'd like to. If you'd like to speak, you don't know what you want to talk about, by all means, contact us and we can put some ideas into your head. Or if you have a topic that you'd like to hear, and if you would like to speak and have a topic, I mean, that's probably optimal. So by all means, contact us either by the links below or on the Slack or anything, right? So once again, we do have the links for any talks, and we're always looking. You coming forward with any ideas makes it easier on us, and we appreciate that. If you have any questions, ask them in the remote chat, and we'll be monitoring the chat to forward them on. And with that, our speaker this month is our own Ian, who will be doing ethical software design. And I am very much looking forward to this. And with that, I will ask that our behind the scenes coordinator transfer over control to Ian and let him have at, if you wouldn't mind.
I think all you have to do is stop screen share. There we go. It worked.
You have the power. Okay.
All right. Cool. Welcome everyone to my talk. It's on ethical software design. It is a warning and an explanation, and unfortunately, it doesn't have as many answers as you probably want it to, but it's an interesting exploration of some of the things that could happen. I hope that by the end of it, you have a increased appreciation for the fact that you don't have to be unethical to write unethical code. And we'll explore that through an example that kind of got started from an argument I had. So first of all, who am I? I am a massive geek for everything nerdy. That's a picture of me in a wizard costume. It's not an exaggeration. It's very warm. And real armor under there as well. So I LARP and I do all sorts of really nerdy things. Professionally, I am a team lead and senior developer at Punchcard Systems. You can find us at punchcard.io. Check out our page there for all the stuff we do. We don't have a blog yet, but eventually we will. I'm also a board member of the DevEdmonton Society, so I help run the place and try and make sure that we're providing services that are valuable to all Edmonton developers. If you want to check out the DevEdmonton Society, I would recommend it. It's really cool. I think everyone here is in there, but if not, I'd highly recommend it. And you can find me, that's my actual email down there for work, Ian at punchcard.io down there. You can find me at Protagonist on Twitter. And this Calendly link, which you can see over there, will actually book a 30-minute meeting in my calendar for basically any reason. So just let me know what you want to talk about. I'm happy and willing to talk about anything. However, I am not an ethicist. So all opinions in this deck are my own and are well researched and considered, but should not be considered an authoritative take. This is not someone who has years of experience within the domain of software ethics talking. This is about someone who's really passionate about it and well researched, but ultimately that's it. I'm also not right-leaning. It's important to state your possible biases right at the start so people know what's going to happen, right? And what's clear about that. Like, it's a sub-theme of this is recognizing when you have biases. And so putting it right there. And I am also not a man named Damien Warner, who will talk on him later. But let's talk tech. All right, Twitter. Here's a quote from Phil Elverum. Twitter is stupid. I mean, it sucks. It's not really a good way to communicate, and it's really difficult to use for any functional thing. Follow me at Protagonist on Twitter. Twitter's awful. We all know this. It's bad. It's bad for many different reasons. And as I discovered about a month ago, rediscovered, because I did know this, it's awful for a variety of different things. So chapter 1 is that awful bird app and the Olympics. So this is Damien Warner. He's a certified badass. He is incredible. He is a Canadian Olympic athlete. He's a decathlete, and not only is he a decathlete, he is the gold medal winner in the decathlete this year. So it's just awful that he is that good at anything. I'm not good at one thing, never mind 10 things to a world-class level. And I think you can all agree it should be illegal to be as competent as Damien is at as many things that Damien is. So first of all, congratulations to him. And also, he's Canadian. Great, fantastic. Canada stands atop the hardest Olympic sport. This is Twitter. Twitter is an objectively bad site, like really bad. It's a cesspool full of some of the worst of humanity, and it has a 240 character limit to try and like throttle communications. What the heck? Follow me at Protagonist on Twitter. This is the photo that we're going to be talking about. This is what caused this talk. I've given a variety of this talk in a couple of different places now, internally at Punchcard during one of the DevEdmonton weekly chats, and now I'm doing it here. And eventually this should be on YouTube so I can send it to everyone because I really love talking about this. So this is an amazing photo. It's really, really good. It's incredible. It shows Damien literally towering above his competition. Everybody else is gassed and he's standing there like some form of triumphant conqueror, right? Like, we don't think of Canada as aggressive, but like, take that, athletes, we won, and the hardest sport. It's 10 out of 10, just amazing. It's an accidental renaissance. It's an amazing thing. What I want you to start thinking about, which is going to become quickly relevant, is what is the subject of this photo? So let's answer that question right now. When you see bold text on the presentation, it means I'm asking you the question. So in chat, who's the subject of this photo, or what is the subject of this photo? Just waiting for people to find keyboards. I'll short circuit the chat and say that, in my opinion, my humble opinion, unquestionably, the Olympic gold medalist Damien Warner is the subject of this photo. But there's a problem there. So Twitter oftentimes displays their photos in a nice sort of cropped environment, right? They don't want to display the full photo because what if your photo is massive, right? You want to display a reasonable chunk of the photo. So if we want to display that photo in a way that doesn't take a bunch of vertical space, i.e. not the roughly 3x2 size of the original, how would we decide to do so? And we can't have individual people like literally cutting the photos onto what the subject is. So the solution needs to be automated in some way. So it's algorithmic, so that every photo that's uploaded to Twitter follows the solution. So we need some way of highlighting the subject of our photo automatically so that we can make sure to display the right crop. The solution would be what's called saliency detection, basically trying to figure out what is the actual subject of the photo. So we can make some pretty common assumptions, right? So it's likely to be prominently displayed. It would be rare for the subject of the photo to be in the bottom right of the photo. It's also incredibly likely that humanity, being very vain creatures, would have the subject of the photo be a person, and probably a prominently displayed person. So if they take up a large amount of the frame, they're probably the subject. But when there are multiple people displayed, how do we define who's actually the subject? Like this. Let's take a look at this nice, beautiful Shutterstock photo here. It's of a party. There's a bunch of people. They're having fun. But who is the subject of this photo? It's probably the woman standing directly behind the cake, which we know from societal context clues, right? The person central to the cake is likely to be the actual person who the birthday is about. And you could probably make a pretty strong case that is the subject of this photo. But not everyone here is the same. Some people have darker skin, some people have lighter skin, some people are wearing glasses, some people's face are obscured, and the woman's face is obscured by the confetti she's blowing. It would be hard to detect that, and detecting faces is really difficult. So with that photo that I mentioned previously, who do you think Twitter highlighted in their crops? And I mean, no spoilers, this is a very leading question, because the answer is, of course, it highlighted the people at the bottom of the photo and not the triumphant Canadian God King towering above all other people on Earth to proclaim that Canada once and for all is the best. This leads me to chapter 2, about how this happened and why this happened and what caused this and what implications that has for software design in general. And I really like this Peter Norvig quote, which will become relevant once we start to explain exactly what machine learning is. We don't have better algorithms, we just have more data. So we didn't get better at chess, essentially. We just invented faster computers that would process more possible states of chess. And thus we had better chess algorithms. Because when you can throw scale at something, why would you throw design at it? Because scale is probably cheaper. It's easy to buy a powerful computer and just run it on the thing. So let's talk about the algorithms responsible for this, because I think we can all agree this is wrong. This is not the subject of the photo, and doing this does a disservice to the people who are involved. Imagine if this algorithm was detecting faces at one of those photo booths, and you walk in there with your friend who happens to be a person of color, and it tries to detect your faces so it can frame it properly, and it highlights you and like cuts off their face in every single photo. That, I think we can all agree, would be discriminatory. So let's talk about why that's the case. So first of all, let's take a divergence into what machine learning actually is, because I know that's a subject that not everybody understands. They understand it basically in a level of depth that most people do, but they don't have like a deeper level of understanding. So fundamentally, machine learning is the act of training an algorithm to prefer certain outcomes based on the data. So fundamentally, you feed a lot of data to an algorithm, a ton of data, thousands upon thousands of images, and you reward it every time it picks the correct outcome. I didn't have time to put this in my slides, but you probably interacted with a machine learning algorithm today and didn't realize it, because odds are, if you exist on the internet, you probably clicked a CAPTCHA, which is actually a Google recognition algorithm, because what you are doing is you are literally turking out this process. Look up mechanical turking if you're not familiar with that term. Basically, doing the computer's work for it. So when you select all of these that are buses, or select all of these that are browsers, or whatever it is, you are actually training their algorithm what success is in that case, and they're comparing yours and everybody else's answers to that particular image against its heuristics and improving it. So the algorithm wants to find the best outcomes the most often. So it adjusts its internal heuristics of how it's processing and reacting to the data to prefer results that get it rewarded more often. So it makes it what it thinks to be an intelligent tweak to its heuristics, and then says, if this gets me more outcomes, then it's a good tweak. So you feed it a bunch of photos and reward it every time that it recognizes a face, and it will begin to train itself to recognize faces faster and more accurately. Then you take that process and you run it like a million times, as much as you can, with as big a data set as you can, and it will begin to hone those heuristics to a razor's edge. So machine learning is essentially big data sets plus rewarding success plus lots of repetition equals a trained algorithm. So this brings up some questions. So what does machine learning actually know? Does it know that a face is a face? Well, not really. What it knows is it knows that if it pushes it through this series of heuristics, doing all sorts of adjacency analysis on pixels and weightings and various different things, that it knows roughly kind of what is a face. So it might know that if it sees a face outline that is a certain color, that maybe is a certain skin color, that's probably a face. But this can be deceived. If you were to run this image through a facial recognition algorithm, it would say, this is not a face, but I think everyone here could look at this and say, yeah, that's a face. So it's not really intelligent. It is intelligently informed. And this brings up the question of like, well, is the Saliency algorithm actually to blame for this? And I had someone ask me this on Twitter on the thread that this talk is based on. Like, do you assume that, like, do you know it's the algorithm that's causing this? It might be that this person has a valid point. It might be my pure personal heuristics to point that out. Like, it might not be that. So I decided to kind of do some experiments. So the experiment that I did was by cropping the original image and re-uploading it to the awful bird site. So we'll start with cropping from the top down. So we'll take the image and we'll remove pixels from the top and see what happens. And we'll repeat the same experiment by taking that same image and removing pixels from the bottom up and seeing what happens. So if what we think is true, that the Twitter algorithm is at some point discriminatory or badly configured or whatever, the result would actually be different in that case. So what do you think the result's going to be in this case? So when I start removing Damien Warner from the top or the people at the bottom, what do you think is going to happen? Who do you think it's going to focus on? I'm not sure what that chat is there, so I'll just give you a couple seconds to, not the subject, yeah. Spoilers, if it's the subject, the talk is over and we will just move on and I'll be done really quickly and we'll all be out of here before 7. Yeah, so this was the result. So on the left is the experiment where I cropped from the bottom up. So what we are consuming in this case is the people at the bottom. And on the right-hand side, what we are consuming is essentially more Damien Warner than everybody else. So when we crop from the bottom up, you can see that the viewpoint moves up, and that by definition, Damien Warner comes into more into view because there is less of the people there. In that final image, it's actually the same size as the viewport, and so it has decided that like the bottom is what's important in this case. And we can verify that by what happens in the second set of images, which is that if we start to delete Damien Warner, you can see that he actually moves up in the perspective and it stays absolutely locked on the people at the bottom. And it should be pointed out that there's no faces on anyone in this other than Damien Warner. He is the only person whose face you can clearly see enough to detect any sort of facial features. Now, we as people know what a person looks like, and so we could say that there's more people at the bottom, but that's also maybe not the case. So how did this happen? Did someone at some point type into an IDE var racism equals 20 and then like racism plus plus? Racism is at 21. This is good. I've made a bad thing. So it's very unlikely that Twitter was inflated by double secret racist people to make sure that Black people were not well detected by the Saliency algorithm. That's kind of farcical in of itself. No one sets out to be that evil unless you're Peter Thiel. But yeah, so the question here is, what do you think happens when you train an algorithm with bad data? Well, the answer becomes you kind of get bad stuff coming out of it. So after an investigation, what happened was the algorithm, which was in this case an algorithm called Pulse, which you can find on GitHub, was created and was trained with a data set that had mostly white faces. It didn't have no faces of people of color, but the faces by and large were white male faces with less people of color and less women in general. So if you supply a data set with more white faces than people of color faces, then it will be better at registering a white face than a people of color because you've simply given it more ammunition and training to go after those faces. And the scale of data sets necessary to actually train an algorithm like this are very large, like easily over 10,000. You might be talking millions or tens or 20s or 30s of millions more than you're talking like 50. So it's very hard to recognize if you don't have a representative sample, right? To do this, you'd have to identify characteristics for all potentially like 500,000 images, and then run those against like what is representative or what is fair or what is ethical to determine that. Also, the majority of researchers in the AI space happen to be white guys, probably with beards, probably with glasses. Sorry, Andy. Also, sorry, me. So we're much less likely to recognize when a sample isn't representative because we look at it and it looks like us. And the response from Twitter was actually that, yeah, Pulse is really bad. This is their blog post where they go through their own large-scale analysis of the algorithm, and they found that people of color and non-binary people and women are consistently discriminated against, and white males are consistently selected by the saliency algorithm. And they found that it's a pretty big thing. And so you can actually see that if you look at the original image that's there, you can see it's displayed at size and not cropped in that image. And on mobile, the saliency algorithm is also removed, and they're in the process of removing it from every aspect of their site because it's really bad. And so, I don't know, credit to them for recognizing it, and they have a really good blog post on why it was the case. But I want to drive this home, so I want to have a really obvious, and this is a very famous example. So I selected 2 people at random from my select a person 5,000 to give me 2 random people on Earth, which should hopefully be completely random and not at all selected because it would be illustrative. And so it gave me a person named Mike McConnell and Barack Obama, of course. So I don't know who Mike McConnell is, but he's some person. But my algorithm tells me these are 2 reasonably famous people. Audience, I know who Mitch McConnell is, don't worry. And so we have these 2 photos, which are created very to prove a point. One of them with Obama at the top, one of them with McConnell at the top, and with their counterpart at the bottom. So another leading question, what do you think is going to happen? I'm not even going to bother with the response on this one. I think you know what's going to happen. It selects Mitch McConnell both times. Like this is the problem, right? This is like, you have to choose someone, right? Your viewport's pretty small. You have to zoom in at some point, and overwhelmingly, it's got to be Mitch. It's got to be Mitch McConnell. And so it's just, this is the issue. And at this point, I was curious, and so I started to do further experiments. And I was arguing with someone as to whether or not this was a problem, or even like actually present. And so I did more experiments. I replaced, we were talking like, is this the facial recognition or is this something else, right? Maybe it's their placement, maybe it's where they are. Because like, what if it was just there's more people at the bottom of the Warner photo and there's less people at the top of the Warner photo where Warner himself takes up most of it? So like, what happens if you interrupt the algorithm at some point? So I put another random person, a Matt Damon, wearing a mask, and I replaced Mitch McConnell there. And so when we disrupt the facial algorithm, it actually shows Obama, which is great. That's phenomenal. So we're pretty clear that it's the facial recognition portion of the Pulse algorithm that's busted here. But we decided to do one last one, which is we replaced Barack Obama. Everyone knows oh gosh, I'm going to get this wrong. The 44th president of the United States. I think I'm right there. With Jay-Z, another famous person. So Jay-Z, this famous person, against Matt Damon, some unknown white guy. And it selects, of course, both of them at this point. It selects the bottom photo. So when you disrupt the facial recognition algorithm, it's like, all right, give me the one that's at the bottom. It might be the subject. So this is pretty illustrative of the problems of this algorithm. Like I said, if we go back, nobody is setting racism or setting some value, or there's not a conscious decision that was made here. But it was a series of unconscious biases that caused this to happen. And it's really hard to detect these. And sorry to say, I only have some tips here. I don't have concrete answers on what is or isn't ethical. I think we can all agree that's not ethical, and that's not well designed, and that's discriminatory, and it's bad, and we should avoid situations that end up with something like this. So the benefits of artificial intelligence are massive, right? In this case, we're cropping an image, but we might have a variety of other things that are serving us with this this technique, this machine learning stuff. but the dangers are also incredibly large. So what does that mean for us, right? All right, Twitter is racist. Fine. Pulse is racist. Fine. Not actually, right? Because they didn't set out to be, but they created a system that was. So what does this mean for us? Well, it means that ethics is really hard. When people are working on a software problem, the ethics of what to do aren't often considered, or worse, aren't visible. So the people who built Pulse were trying to build what they thought was the correct solution to a software problem, but they ended up training a racist algorithm without intending it. And furthermore, you'd think that like we could have like a code of conduct or something, right, for software designers. Well, the Association for Computing Machinery has a code of ethics, but when they were updating it, they wanted to do some research to see if it was actually effective. And they found that the presence or absence or familiarity of a software developer did not meaningfully influence the decision of software developers towards or against situations that were against the code of ethics. They found that the code of ethics violations oftentimes occurred from things that were the result of the work that was done rather than the work. No one's writing var racism, but people are producing systems that cause it. It's oftentimes invisible as well. Like an ethical quandary or situation is hard, especially because we tend to believe big data. If you have the results of 1 million people filling out a survey, that survey should be representative, right? But the analysis and the crunching of your data is only as good as your underlying data, but it's also only as good as your underlying context of the data. So a great example of this is the fact that people of color are routinely discriminated against by healthcare algorithms. They're given less time to live, worse health outcomes. And when large organizations like, say, health insurance offer rates to people, they are reflective of the data, but they aren't fair. So healthcare costs for people of color are much higher, especially health insurance costs, because they adequately reflect the situation, which is that healthcare people tend to have worse health problems, but they ignore the possible reasons why that's likely the case. So like the quality and frequency of the care that people of color receive tend to be less often and less valuable than white individuals because they tend not to have the means to do it. Similarly, people of color are more commonly targets of crime, but they are more commonly living in areas where crime is prevalent, and where you are living is a key factor in how much crime you experience. So it's really hard. And if we're being honest, a lack of ethics to a company can be profitable. So I did a quick search on finding like 5 simple problems in ethics. And I came up with this link that says that like addictive design, so loot boxes, the temple run side of things where it's like easy to restart a game or something like that, or even just things that reward you for doing the right thing. Questionable personal data ownership. So do you own your actual data? Algorithmic bias, which I've just kind of covered, weak security and personally identifiable information, or PII, and prioritizing feature over impact all have pretty substantial downsides to the individual person, but also substantial upsides for businesses. If you have an addictive design, chances are people are going to be using your software for longer. And if they're using your software for longer, they're spending more money, or they're more valuable because they're seeing more ads. And so you want to make something addicting, and you get rewarded because of it. My first career out of university was writing games for iPhone, and we would have regularly large purchases from kids on the iPhones because there wasn't protections of that. And that was like a key source of revenue, and profitability of apps within app purchases dropped across the board when Apple put on parental controls on what you could buy and forced people to give refunds. And so these addictive designs and all these things, they do have a cost. With personal data ownership, you give someone the ability to mine your data for money. Right? This is what Facebook does. This is what Google does. They take your data, and you are valuable because you inform what they can tell people about their data. And people will pay Google or Facebook tons of money to figure out what people named Andy want to eat for dinner, because then they could target ads. And even an algorithmic bias, if it's creating an algorithm that isn't biased, costs more. So why wouldn't you take something that's cheaper and available, right? Like Pulse was selected probably because it was cheap and because it was effective, but it probably wasn't selected because it was unbiased. And then security, well, I mean, it doesn't cost you anything to implement crappy security, and who cares about other people's information, even if it leaks. And if you prioritize features over the impact of those possible features, I really wanted to use, by the way, what's his name, Jeff Goldblum from Jurassic Park for this, but I couldn't find a way to get each of these to be their own slide in the time required. And so unfortunately, you'll have to imagine the Jeff Goldblum quote about, they didn't think they should. So just imagine, place it in your minds here. If you prioritize features over impact, you're going to have lots of features. Your application is going to be really great, but you might hurt your users because of it. And the worst part is that fixing this problem can be really difficult. It's never explicit in code. There's no var racism, right? There's none of that stuff. But if you console log it, it still prints out, and it's pretty high in some things. And the other part is that what might be obvious to some might be invisible to others. Your background and culture has a huge impact on how you view the world. There's been this link from the Smithsonian is going to a study where, as a child, if you are around a variety of accents, you are more likely to understand every person you meet later in life. If you grow up in a one-horse town and all you hear is German, let's say, when someone speaks at you with a Welsh accent, you'll probably have more difficulties understanding them. But if you grew up in a rich metropolitan area like Edmonton, picking at random, and you encounter all sorts of accents in your day-to-day life, especially as a child, you are more likely to understand accents later in life. So you're often on the wrong side of things like forces like capitalism and profitability, and it's hard to recognize before it goes to scale, but it's easy to call out once it's there. So I do have some tips to help with this, because I don't have an answer for how to write ethical software, but I have some tips of what to do in that case. And the first is just to try and avoid the bystander effect. So this is when something happens, everybody thinks, well, it's someone else's problem to solve it. This is one of the first tips they give you in a first aid course, which is that don't use any sort of vague language. Be direct and commandative in what you're saying. If you say, oh my gosh, someone has fallen down, please call 911, chances are seconds or minutes could go by without someone pulling up their phone. But the correct answer is to go, you down there, guy in the red, call 911. I don't know who you are, but call it. And so he's picking up his phone, he's dialing. And we've reduced the time it takes for the authorities to be notified. Same thing here. If you see something, say something. Speak up. Be someone who points it out. And the second thing is to consider your code and the impact you'll have on the end user. Try and put yourself within the user's shoes and see, like, how is this going to affect them, right? Try and think of possible problems before it's there. A lot of more advanced software development techniques are really about the care and consideration you put into your code. Because fundamentally, there comes a certain point at which the tech is pretty easy. The actual writing of lines into an IDE and the solving of problems is simple. It's how those problems are composed and how those problems are solved and in what way that's actually complicated. And so add a facet to your self-reflection or to your review that's about the ethical concerns, especially where your code is user interfacing or at scale in a way that might prove unfair. The next thing to do is to consider your biases, whether that's learned or unlearned, cultural or otherwise, before you really formulate a position on something. And that's sometimes hard to do because you're considering your own biases through the lens of your own biases. Everything you do is colored by them. I grew up in St. Albert among a lot of mostly white people. That colors everything about who I am. And it's important to recognize that because then you can account for it. But you don't have to do that alone. You can reach out and talk with it with others, especially from someone who might have a different viewpoint on things you don't have. Something like a sensitivity reader is really essential. So having someone come in and audit it from a different background might be able to look at something and say, hey, I don't think you've properly considered this. My last tip is try and not be evil. We all have somewhat of a choice of where we work. Try not to put yourself in situations where you're asked to do things you're not comfortable with. But also that recognize that people are fallible and trying to do their best and to challenge ethical issues where they are quickly without question, but work with people to resolve them. Don't be, Pulse is racist, burn down Twitter, but recognize that, hey, they're trying. Like if we go back to Twitter itself, the awful bird site, they know what they've done and they're taking steps to solve it. And so call it out, but also call out the people who are trying to help. I think Mr. Rogers said, look for the helpers in any sort of bad situation, right? Focus on that and help those people. Okay, All right, we have one last thing that we're going to go over, and then I'll open up the floor for questions. So I'm going to put up one of the most basic examples of anything that is discriminatory, and it's your job to figure out why it's discriminatory. To log in and register page, right? You've seen a million of these. This is just the WooCommerce one. It's everywhere. How is this discriminatory? And I'll wait for somebody to actually put a guess in the thing. It's persnickety, by the way. Yes, Andy, excellent, good eye. It's correct. So the thing in here that's discriminatory is first name, last name. And Abram is correct. Some people have only one name, but you can see it's required that you put in both first name and last name. So never anger the Beyhive. So the register form would anger the following celebrities: Beyonce, Bork, Bono, Fabio, Jewel, Liberace, Madonna. I think Liberace's dead, so I don't care about him. Morrissey, Oprah, Seal, Sinbad, and Usher, just to name a few. But much more importantly, there are mononymous cultures. There are lots of places in Asia that only have one name. The Javanese people of Indonesia, for example, typically only have one name. It's increasingly becoming less likely because we have a modern world, but it is not inclusive to do that. You're forcing someone to add in a not applicable or something, or a dot or a space just to get through the form. And even the idea of a surname is actually a relatively recent invention. They're very uncommon now to not have one, but they were actually started because for a while you didn't leave your village. And it's like, who's Joe? He's the only person who looks around when I yell John or Joe in the village, right? But when people started moving, they needed a way to differentiate people in that village because now they were bigger suddenly. So John Smith was the, oh, I forgot the spelling mistake there. John Smith was the John who's the Smith in your village. Oh, that's John Smith. That's John Miller. That's John Programmer, right? It was a way of differentiating, and that became common surnames like Miller or Smith or Programmer, of course. So like, I don't have the answers. I hope this was illustrative in the way that the best intentions can result in systems that are bad. And so I guess my main piece of advice is just try and be excellent to each other and try and figure out the possibilities that might come and recognize the fact that we are all fallible. Like Socrates said, I am not wise, I only know enough to know that I am not wise. So recognize your own fallibility, recognize your own biases, and account for them properly. And when someone's pointing out something that might be problematic, listen to them and try and evolve your biases or whatever you have to try and elevate your worldview to something that's a little bit more useful. Because you might not type var racism equals 20, but I can't tell you with a straight face that I wouldn't have seen the bias in the underlying data set. And I probably would have tested it on a whole bunch of images. And probably the test images I would have tested it on, if I wrote Pulse, would have been mostly representative of me and not really representative of other people. I'm not sure I would have made that distinction early on in my career. And so just try and do what you can, try and call things out, and try and educate yourself on your own personal failings so that you might be able to solve them in the future. And try not to be evil, but try and be excellent to each other. So that's my talk. That's my exploration of a terrible Twitter algorithm and all of the stuff it has. I have lots more to say on other areas of ethical design, but I couldn't get them in. Like I could do a whole presentation on the idea of addictive design. I'm well prepared to do that presentation, having built a lot of them and having consumed a lot of them through the various different apps and games that I interact with. So I'd love to hear questions if there are any, but there weren't any questions during it, so I'm not sure how many questions there'll be at the end. So that's what I got.
I'm not seeing questions pop up. Some thank yous. I'm not sure if you can see the chat, Ian.
Oh yeah, it's on the side of my screen. I have many monitors, many monitors.
Yeah. Yeah,
right.
It's a very interesting thing. I don't know how many of you are aware at all about what's been going on with Timnit Gebru at Google, which has some very relevant discussions about inclusivity and supposed inclusivity. She's an AI researcher who was let go from Google. She was brought in to improve their inclusivity, and then she was let go. And there's quite a bunch of stuff about that. I've also seen some stuff as well, particularly about like AI and facial recognition. Some of the problems that you identified, like with the Twitter stuff, has far-reaching and very impactful things, in that some police departments were using similar data sets to do facial recognition. And what they found out was that for people, and I dislike the term white, I use European descent. People of European descent were particularly males, were coming up with correct facial recognition in like 98%. Females of European descent were somewhere around 96%. And then of recent, and I use recent as well there to be clear, of African American, recent African descent, were showing up at like 85% in terms of the accuracy. And police were using out and going and making arrests. And so you had people that had recorded alibis that were actually having to appear in court. Like, no, I was in a different city when the thing that you arrested me for. And they had pressed charges under the basis that, yeah, but we got a facial recognition match. And then somebody had to come in and say, yeah, no, your algorithm sucks.
Yeah, and
by the way,
in that circumstance, right, do they have the resources available to make that argument, right? And
yes,
or even was it available, right?
Yeah.
So did you know that was why you were arrested, right? Like what was the disclosure process there as well? There's all sorts of problems here. Like there are a ton of ethical problems on the internet, and especially targeting people who are not white guys with beards. Because when you build, there's Cooper's Law, I believe it is, that says that any organization, any product of an organization is likely to be reflective of that organization. If you have, it's most commonly used through communication. So how Google communicates internally affects how they communicate externally. And what that says kind of in the abstract is products are representative of the people who make them. And when you have a majority of an industry being white guys with beards, products are going to be reflective of that. And so that is something we all have to reckon with.
Yep. And the assumptions that go with that. I mean, people form all sorts of things, and they just have absolutely no realization that, things are different. Malcolm Gladwell had a wonderful podcast.
It's a great episode. I know the one you're talking about, the fallibility of memory.
No. Actually, it's how U.S. schools, U.S. colleges are rated, because there's an annual rating that occurs. And what he found out was that there was this traditionally Black college in the southern U.S., which targets people from disadvantaged, areas, which, in the southern U.S. is predominantly Black. And the way that they could get a higher rating had nothing to do with the quality of their teaching. What they needed to do was increase their tuitions and target people from higher incomes, because people from higher incomes are more likely to graduate, and the number of people graduating was part of the algorithm. Of course, if you come from a higher income, you have less income pressure on you, which makes you more likely to graduate. You see, it's a whole cascading series of things. And so the best way, it had nothing to do with their staff, with their teachers, with their courses or anything. What they needed was fancier dorms and more selective tuitions, and then they could increase, right?
And like people, any system that is built by people is going to be as fallible as the people themselves. Like the episode I thought you were referencing was a Malcolm Gladwell podcast episode about how people have memories. And they took the events of September 11th on 2001, and a professor on September 12th had his students write down what they were doing that day, the previous day, in as much detail as they possibly could, and sign it. And he took all of them, put them in envelopes, and tossed them in a filing cabinet for 3 years. At the end, as they were getting out of their undergrad, he produced them again and let people read them. And he got results that most people disagreed with their recollections. They said, I don't know whose handwriting this is, but that's my signature, and this is wrong. When the reality was that they just had this fallibility of memory. And if your memory is infallible or is fallible, what about the rest of your assumptions and biases? I'd love to continue discussing this, but I have an obligation afterwards. So unfortunately, Andy, I'm going to have to bow out and let you close the rest of this off yourself. If anybody wants to reach me for further talk on this, I love talking about it. I'll put my Calendly link in Slack later on. You can always find me on Slack or by my email, which is ian@punchcard.io. So thank you for having me, Andy and Abram. But I will bid you adieu, and I will go put my kids to bed. So good night, everybody.
Thank you, Ian. I'm going to close out the slides. We have a few more to go through, although I'm not exactly sure exactly how relevant all of them are. Here we go. So thank you once again to Ian for bringing that topic. As you can tell, I am fascinated by the topic as well. Recognizing, of course, the privilege that I've occurred, throughout my own career. And, first stage is as much as anyone deserves the positions that they're in and so forth. And I'm sure that many of you have worked hard. Recognition that there is both chance and favoritism that play in your favor in those things is often helpful, and understanding that as a basis for stuff can often lead you to be at least more empathic for the people that are coming from less advantaged situations. I don't believe that we've had any jobs that anyone has posted. Of course, we are always happy to post when anyone is looking. And so let us know, and we will do that for every presentation. So please, by all means, we will post opportunities. There is an opportunities thread on the DevEdmonton Slack, but we'll bring things up here. We didn't have anything for this month. So normally we do give thanks to all of our sponsors, of which we have a few, but we are not really sponsored at the moment. So I'm going to skip over that quickly. When we do get back to in person, then we'll be looking at our sponsors once again. And with that as well, there is a sponsor thing, which, at some point we'll, be looking for in the future. We have a job board. You can go and look there as well if anything is posted. I'm not sure if it's been updated in a while. I'll have to ask Ian and Abram about that. Our next meetup is, lovely spelling mistake there, Andy. Scheduled for October the 7th. That's my Manitoba accent. It's October in Winnipeg, in case you didn't know. We do things slightly different there. The first Thursday of the month. That may change depending on some other things. We had some conflicts this month, so we decided to push it back. So, but October 7th is when we're next scheduled. And as I mentioned, we are looking for speakers. So anyone that could come forward, we would welcome you. And with that, we're going to return to the remote tables. And I've once again like to thank Ian, and looking forward to talks that we have coming up in the future. So please step forward. And with that, I believe, not sure if there's anything that I have to do to take us back.